The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for the 15th time in as many cycles. Ambassador Kethril of the Zephyrian Republic clutched her bioluminescent datapad with all four of her delicate appendages, watching the holographic displays that showed the same devastating truth they had witnessed for months now. The numbers didn't lie, no matter how many times different species ran the calculations. The Devourers had consumed another star system. This time, it was the prosperous mining worlds of the Taurian Collective. 7 billion souls, simply gone. Not killed in the traditional sense, but absorbed, their consciousness and life force drawn into the writhing mass of dark energy that swept across space like a cosmic plague. "The probability matrices are clear," announced High Counselor Vex through his translation device, his normally steady voice carrying an undertone of defeat that chilled everyone present. "We have run every simulation, consulted every strategic algorithm our combined civilizations possess. The Devourers cannot be stopped through conventional means." Around the circular chamber, representatives of 47 different species shifted uncomfortably. The Crystalline Collective's representative chimed like broken glass. The floating gas beings of Nephros dimmed their usually brilliant colors to somber grays and blacks. Even the warlike Thorian Empire, who had never backed down from any conflict in their 3,000-year history, remained silent. Ambassador Kethril's own people, the Zephyrians, had already begun the evacuation protocols. Their beautiful floating cities were being dismantled, their population moving to the furthest reaches of the galaxy in hopes of buying time. Time for what? Nobody really knew anymore. "The quantum resonance weapons proved ineffective," continued Counselor Vex. "Our most advanced shield technologies last mere minutes against their absorption field. Even our temporal displacement devices only delay the inevitable by a few cycles." The chamber fell into the kind of silence that spoke of civilizations facing their end. In the past 6 months, the Devourers had consumed 12 star systems, growing stronger with each world they absorbed. They moved like a dark tide across the galaxy, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. It was then that Ambassador Reginald Chen of the Terran Federation stood up from his seat. The human was unremarkable by galactic standards. Average height, simple bipedal form, no obvious evolutionary advantages. His species had only joined the Galactic Council 50 years ago, making them practically newcomers in galactic politics. "With respect, Counselor Vex," Chen said in his straightforward manner, "I noticed that these probability calculations don't include any scenarios where we actually fight back." The comment sent ripples of various emotional expressions throughout the chamber. The Viridian representative's feathers ruffled in what humans had learned to recognize as their version of nervous laughter. The Aquatic Federation's ambassador released a stream of bubbles that translated roughly to naive optimism. Counselor Vex's multiple eyes focused on the human with what could only be described as gentle patience. "Ambassador Chen, your species' determination is admirable, but we must face reality. The Devourers have technologies that predate most of our civilizations. They consume not just matter, but the fundamental life force itself. Our greatest minds have concluded that resistance will only accelerate our destruction." Chen remained standing, his expression unchanged. "So the plan is to run until there's nowhere left to run?" "The plan is survival," replied Ambassador Kethril, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had already accepted defeat. "We scatter across the galaxy, hide in the dark spaces between stars, hope that some small portion of our peoples can outlast this catastrophe." The human nodded slowly as if processing this information. Then he did something that surprised everyone in the chamber. He smiled. "I appreciate the strategic thinking," Chen said, "but humanity respectfully declines to participate in this plan." The silence that followed was deafening. High Counselor Vex leaned forward in his floating chair, his biomechanical enhancements whirring softly as he processed what he had just heard. "Ambassador Chen," Vex said carefully, "I fear your translation matrix may be malfunctioning. Did you just say that humanity refuses to evacuate in the face of an existential threat to all galactic civilization?" "The translation is working fine," Chen replied. "We're not running. We're going to figure out how to stop them." The Thorian Empire's representative, a massive being covered in natural armor plates, let out what their species used for laughter. It sounded like rocks grinding together. "Human," he said in his booming voice, "your species has existed in space for barely 5 decades. You have no idea what you're facing." Chen turned to face the Thorian directly. "General Kronek, isn't it? I've read about your people's military history. Very impressive. Conquered half your galactic arm through superior tactics and weapons. But you've decided to run from this enemy without ever actually engaging them in battle." General Kronek's armored plates shifted in what humans had learned was a sign of irritation among his species. "We have engaged them, human. 3 of our most powerful battle fleets made contact with their advance forces. They lasted less than 1 cycle before being consumed entirely." "I read the reports," Chen said. "Your fleets used conventional weapons against an enemy that feeds on energy. You sent your ships in formation against something that doesn't follow physical laws as we understand them. You fought them like they were just another alien species instead of something fundamentally different." Around the chamber, various species began expressing their versions of indignation. The floating jellyfish-like beings of the ethereal conclave pulsed angry red colors. The insectoid hive collective clicked their mandibles in unison, but Counselor Vex held up one of his appendages for silence. His ancient eyes studied the human carefully. "What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador Chen?" Chen activated his own datapad, and holographic displays filled the air above his seat. "The Devourers aren't just consuming matter and energy. According to your own research, they're absorbing consciousness itself. They're not a military force in any sense that our current strategies can address. They're something else entirely." The displays showed technical readouts that few in the chamber could fully understand. Human technology was still considered primitive by galactic standards, but it was also uniquely chaotic and unpredictable. "Every species in this chamber has spent millions of years evolving beyond their primitive survival instincts," Chen continued. "You've created perfect societies, eliminated conflict, achieved harmony with your environments. You've become, in many ways, perfect." Ambassador Kethrill's bioluminescent patches flickered in confusion. "And you see this as a weakness?" "I see it as a vulnerability the Devourers are exploiting," Chen replied. "They feed on consciousness, but specifically on ordered, evolved consciousness. Every report shows they're drawn to the most advanced civilizations first. They're not just consuming life, they're consuming perfection." The chamber erupted in dozens of different sounds, representing various forms of outrage. The crystalline beings rang like angry wind chimes. The gas creatures flashed brilliant colors in rapid sequence. Even the normally serene tree shepherds creaked and groaned in protest. Chen waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "Humans come from what you all politely call a death world. We evolved in constant conflict, not just with our environment, but with each other. We've never eliminated our primitive instincts. We're not perfect, not evolved, not harmonious. We're still, in many ways, the violent, chaotic, unpredictable species we were when we first picked up rocks and decided to hit things with them." General Kronek leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. "You speak of primitivism as if it were an advantage. Against the Devourers? It might be," Chen said. "They've consumed 12 systems full of the most advanced, most perfectly evolved civilizations in the galaxy. But they haven't tried to consume Earth. our intelligence suggests they've actually avoided human space entirely. Counselor Vex's biomechanical enhancements whirred more rapidly as he processed this information. That could simply mean they haven't reached your region of space yet. Or it could mean they can't process us the same way they process you, Chen countered. Human consciousness isn't ordered. We don't think in perfectly logical patterns. We make decisions based on instinct, emotion, and what our military calls creative stupidity. We solve problems by trying things that shouldn't work until we find something that does. The human paused, looking around the chamber at faces representing the finest achievements of galactic civilization. Every species here has tried to fight the Devourers using your greatest strengths. Advanced technology, perfect strategy, logical analysis, and every species here has failed. Maybe it's time to try fighting them with someone's greatest weaknesses. Ambassador Kethral's bioluminescent patches dimmed as she considered this. Even if your theory is correct, what could humanity possibly do that our combined civilizations cannot? Chen smiled again, but this time there was something predatory in the expression that made several species shift uncomfortably. We're going to do what humans do best, he said. We're going to be unreasonable. The following cycles brought a flurry of activity, unlike anything the Galactic Council had seen in centuries. While most species continued their evacuation protocols, a small number of their finest scientific minds quietly began working with human researchers on what many considered an exercise in futility. Dr. Sarah Martinez stood in the main laboratory aboard the human research vessel, Curiosity, watching as Zephyrian biochemists worked alongside crystalline collective engineers and human physicists. The scene would have been heartwarming if it weren't for the fact that they were essentially working on their civilization's last desperate gamble. The problem, Dr. Martinez explained to her mixed-species team, is that we're trying to understand something that operates outside our normal scientific framework. The Devourers don't just consume matter and energy. They consume the organizing principles that hold consciousness together. Scientist Krell of the Crystalline Collective chimed in harmonious tones that translated as curiosity. But consciousness cannot be consumed. It is not matter or energy. That's what we thought too, said Dr. Martinez. But the evidence suggests otherwise. When the Devourers absorb a population, they're not just killing them. They're taking the very essence of their awareness and making it part of themselves. The laboratory's main display showed the readings from the last system to fall to the Devourers. The energy signatures were unlike anything in any species' databases. The key insight, continued Dr. Martinez, is that they seem to be specifically adapted to absorb highly evolved, orderly consciousness. Every species they've consumed has been at the peak of biological and technological development. Researcher Vilthak of the Thorian Empire, one of their few scientists, rumbled his thoughts. And humans represent disorder? Dr. Martinez grinned. Humans represent chaos, beautiful, productive, problem-solving chaos. She activated another display showing human brain scans alongside those of other species. The difference was immediately apparent. Where other species showed neat, organized patterns of neural activity, human brains looked like storms of electrical activity with no clear pattern or logic. We don't think in straight lines, Dr. Martinez explained. We make intuitive leaps, hold contradictory ideas simultaneously, and somehow make it work. Our consciousness is so disorganized that it might be indigestible to something that feeds on order. The research continued for several more cycles, but it was interrupted when emergency alerts began sounding throughout the research vessel. Admiral Jessica Parker's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. All hands to stations. Long-range sensors have detected Devourer advance forces entering the Centauri sector. Estimated time to human space, 15 cycles. Dr. Martinez looked around at her mixed-species research team. They had promising theories, but theories weren't enough. In 15 cycles, they would need practical solutions. "We're out of time," she said quietly. But even as she spoke those words, her human mind was already working on problems that had no logical solutions. It was time to see if unreasonable thinking could achieve what reason had failed to accomplish. In the depths of space, something vast and dark turned its attention toward the small, chaotic species that had refused to run. The Devourers had consumed countless civilizations, absorbed the essence of trillions of perfectly evolved minds. But they had never encountered anything quite like humanity. The stage was set for a confrontation between order and chaos, between the inevitable and the impossible. And for the first time in months, there was something other than despair in the hearts of those who watched the stars. Admiral Jessica Parker stood in the command center of the Terran Defense Station Omega, watching displays that showed the impossible becoming reality. 15 cycles had seemed like plenty of time when they started. Now, with only 3 cycles remaining before the Devourers reached the outer edge of human space, she was beginning to understand why every other species had chosen to run. The advanced scouts had returned with readings that defied explanation. The Devourer fleet, if it could even be called that, stretched across light years of space. It wasn't ships in any recognizable sense, but rather a flowing mass of dark energy that bent space around it and left emptiness in its wake. "Status report," Admiral Parker ordered, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. Commander Elena Vasquez pulled up tactical displays that showed the human defense preparations. "All colonies have been evacuated from the outer rim. Defense platforms are online. But, ma'am—" She paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase her concerns diplomatically. "Speak freely, Commander." "The combined firepower of our entire fleet wouldn't slow them down for 5 minutes, based on what happened to the Thorian battle groups." Admiral Parker nodded grimly. The Thorians had thrown everything they had at a much smaller Devourer formation and accomplished nothing except feeding the enemy more energy to consume. "Conventional tactics are off the table," she agreed. "Good thing we're not planning to use any." Dr. Sarah Martinez entered the command center carrying a data pad and wearing the expression of someone who had been surviving on coffee and determination for the past several cycles. Behind her came an unlikely group, the Mixed Species Research Team, several human military strategists, and what appeared to be a maintenance engineer. "Admiral," Dr. Martinez said without preamble, "I think we've figured out how to be properly unreasonable." Parker raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "The Devourers consume consciousness by imposing order on it," Martinez explained, activating holographic displays that filled the command center. They essentially force alien minds to conform to their pattern, then absorb the reorganized consciousness as fuel. The displays showed energy patterns that made most of the non-human observers visibly uncomfortable. The Zephyrian researchers' bioluminescent patches flickered erratically, while the crystalline collective's representative produced discordant chimes. "But human consciousness is already disorganized," Martinez continued. "We tested the theory using volunteer brain patterns exposed to simulated Devourer energy fields." Commander Vasquez frowned. "You experimented on human volunteers with alien technology?" "Standard procedure for desperate times," replied Chief Petty Officer Mike O'Brien, the maintenance engineer. "Besides, ma'am, it was my idea. Figured if Doc Martinez was right, the worst that could happen is I'd get a headache." Dr. Martinez smiled despite the gravity of the situation. Chief O'Brien's brain patterns actually became more chaotic when exposed to the Devourer simulation. Instead of being organized and consumed, his consciousness actively resisted the absorption process. Admiral Parker studied the data, but like most military officers, she was more interested in practical applications than theoretical science. "What does this mean for our defense strategy?" "It means we don't defend," Martinez said. "We attack. but not with weapons or shields or any technology the Devourers have encountered before. We attack with pure, concentrated human unpredictability. The alien researchers in the room exchanged glances that conveyed various forms of concern. Scientist Krell of the Crystalline Collective chimed in frequencies that translated as deep skepticism. "Dr. Martinez," Krell said, "you are proposing to defeat an enemy that has consumed entire star systems using randomness." "Not randomness," Martinez corrected. "Organized chaos. There's a difference." She gestured to Chief O'Brien, who stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had spent his career fixing things that weren't supposed to work. "See, the way I understand it," O'Brien said, "these Devourers are like a really advanced computer virus. They look at a system, figure out how it's organized, then take it over by exploiting that organization. But what happens when you introduce a virus to a system that's already corrupted?" The Thorian researcher Vilthak rumbled thoughtfully. "In our experience, introducing chaos to chaos typically results in destruction." "Or," O'Brien grinned, "it results in something the virus can't understand or control." Admiral Parker was beginning to see the outline of a plan, even if it was unlike anything in standard military doctrine. "What exactly are you proposing?" Dr. Martinez activated another display, this one showing a schematic of human neural patterns linked to ship systems. "We're going to create a feedback loop. Instead of trying to protect our consciousness from the Devourers, we're going to project it directly at them." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "You want to weaponize human consciousness?" Commander Vasquez asked slowly. "We want to give the Devourers the worst case of intellectual indigestion in galactic history," Martinez replied. "Chief O'Brien has been working with our engineers to create neural interface systems that can broadcast human thought patterns through our communication arrays." O'Brien nodded enthusiastically. "It's like psychological warfare, but for entities that eat thoughts." Scientist Krell chimed in tones of alarm. "This plan could result in the destruction of human consciousness entirely, as opposed to the current plan, which definitely results in the destruction of all consciousness," Admiral Parker pointed out dryly. The next 2 cycles passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Throughout human space, volunteers stepped forward for what was possibly the most unusual military recruitment in galactic history. They weren't looking for soldiers or pilots, but for people whose minds worked in particularly chaotic ways. Captain Maria Santos found herself interviewing candidates in what felt like the strangest job fair ever conducted. "Previous experience?" she asked the woman sitting across from her. "I'm a jazz musician and a quantum physicist," replied Dr. Lisa Chen. "I solve equations by improvising mathematical riffs and compose music using particle physics." Captain Santos made a note on her data pad. "Any history of mental health issues? Clinical depression, anxiety disorder, and what my therapist calls aggressively creative problem solving. Perfect, you're in." Similar scenes played out across human space as the most disorganized, creative, and borderline chaotic members of humanity volunteered for what military planners had dubbed Operation Mindstorm. Meanwhile, Chief O'Brien and his engineering teams worked around the clock to install the neural interface systems. The technology was based on existing human brain-computer interfaces, but modified with insights from the mixed species research team. "The key," explained engineer Lisa Park as she calibrated the neural transmitters, "is that we're not trying to organize or focus the human thought patterns. We're amplifying them exactly as they are. Chaotic, contradictory, and impossible to predict." The neural interface chambers looked like medical bays combined with concert halls, filled with monitoring equipment and transmission arrays. Each volunteer would be connected to systems that could broadcast their consciousness directly into space. Dr. A.P. Martinez ran final tests on the equipment while trying not to think too hard about the fact that they were essentially betting the survival of galactic civilization on humanity's inability to think straight. Neural pattern amplifiers online, reported Chief O'Brien from the main engineering station. Transmission arrays are synced to the defense network. We're as ready as we're going to get for something that's never been attempted before. The moment of truth came exactly when long-range sensors had predicted. The Devourers entered human space like a wave of darkness, their presence distorting space-time itself and causing gravitational anomalies throughout the system. Admiral Parker watched from the command center as the enemy approached. They moved with the inevitability of a natural disaster, consuming the outer detection posts without slowing down. Energy readings spiked off the charts as the Devourers began the process that had destroyed so many other civilizations. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions," Parker ordered, following a plan that looked like retreat but was actually something much stranger. The human fleet withdrew toward the inner system, but not in the organized patterns that other species had used. Instead, they moved in formations that looked random to outside observers, but were actually based on the chaotic thought patterns of their crews. "Neural interface volunteers prepare for transmission," Dr. Martinez announced from the research station. Throughout the fleet, 200 volunteers lay in neural interface chambers, their minds connected to the most powerful communication arrays humanity had ever built. Jazz musicians, artists, engineers with ADHD, philosophers who specialized in paradox, and scientists who solved problems by dreaming about them. "Beginning transmission now," Martinez announced. The effect was immediate and completely unexpected. The Devourers, which had been advancing with inexorable purpose, suddenly slowed. Their formation, which had been perfect in its efficiency, began to waver. On the displays in the command center, energy readings from the Devourers started fluctuating wildly. Where they had once shown the steady patterns of a force-consuming organized consciousness, they now displayed the chaotic spikes and valleys that matched human brain activity. "It's working," breathed Commander Vasquez, staring at readings that defied everything they knew about the enemy. But the Devourers weren't retreating. Instead, they were doing something that no species had ever seen them do before. They were changing. The dark energy mass that made up their formation began to shift and pulse in patterns that looked almost confused. The perfect geometric shapes they had maintained across countless light years started breaking apart into irregular, unpredictable forms. "They're trying to absorb our consciousness," Dr. Martinez reported, "but our thought patterns are corrupting their processing systems. They can't organize chaos into their existing framework." Chief O'Brien monitored the neural interfaces and grinned. "It's like introducing a jazz improvisation to a computer that only knows classical music. The system doesn't know what to do with information that doesn't follow rules." The battle, if it could be called that, continued for hours. The Devourers threw more energy at the problem, trying to force human consciousness into patterns they could digest. But every attempt only made the situation worse from their perspective. Dr. Lisa Chen, the jazz physicist, reported from her neural interface chamber, "I can feel them trying to organize my thoughts. It's like something is attempting to force my musical improvisation into a mathematical formula. But every time they think they've figured out the pattern, I change keys and the whole thing falls apart." Similar reports came from other volunteers. The Devourers, accustomed to overwhelming opposition through superior organization, found themselves trying to absorb minds that actively resisted organization. But the real breakthrough came when something unexpected happened. The chaotic human thought patterns began to propagate backward through the Devourer formation. "Admiral," reported the sensor operator, his voice filled with amazement, "the enemy formation is destabilizing. The disruption is spreading through their entire fleet." The displays showed something that would have been beautiful if it weren't so terrifying. The Devourers' perfect formation was breaking down into smaller, more chaotic groups. Their movements became erratic, unpredictable. For the first time in their recorded history, the Devourers appeared to be confused. They're experiencing something they've never encountered before, Dr. Martinez explained. Consciousness that actively fights organization instead of submitting to it. It's creating feedback loops in their systems. Admiral Parker watched the tactical displays with the expression of someone witnessing the impossible. "Are we winning?" "We're not losing," Martinez replied. "But this is just the beginning. The main Devourer force is still coming, and they'll adapt to this strategy eventually. We've bought time, but we need to use it wisely." As if summoned by her words, long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching from deep space. The force they had been fighting was just the advance guard. The true Devourer fleet, the one that had consumed entire civilizations, was still 3 days out. "Time to see if we can scale up unreasonable thinking," Admiral Parker said grimly. Throughout human space, the word went out. Operation Mindstorm had proven that human consciousness could disrupt the Devourer's absorption process, but to face the main fleet, they would need to be more than just chaotic. They would need to be impossibly creative. The next phase of humanity's desperate gamble was about to begin. The main Devourer fleet arrived like a nightmare given form. Admiral Jessica Parker stood in the command center, watching long-range sensors track an enemy force that stretched across 3 star systems. The advance guard they had fought before was nothing compared to this, the collective consciousness of thousands of consumed civilizations, organized into perfect, terrible unity. "Fleet composition analysis complete," reported Commander Vasquez, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Energy signatures indicate they've absorbed at least 40 different species. The formation patterns show technological integration from the Thorian Empire, the Crystalline Collective, the Zephyrian Republic." "They're wearing the faces of our friends," Admiral Parker said quietly. The Devourers hadn't just consumed those civilizations, they had incorporated their knowledge, their strategies, their very identities into a singular purpose. Dr. Sarah Martinez approached the command station, her research team close behind. The past 3 days had been spent in frantic preparation, pushing the boundaries of what human consciousness could achieve. "Admiral, we've made significant discoveries," Martinez announced. "The feedback from Operation Mindstorm gave us insight into how the Devourers actually process consciousness. They're not just consuming minds, they're trying to achieve perfect unity by eliminating chaos and contradiction." She activated displays showing energy patterns from the previous engagement. Every species they've absorbed was, in its own way, seeking perfection. Harmony, order, technological advancement, spiritual enlightenment. The Devourers represent the ultimate expression of that goal, perfect consciousness without conflict or contradiction. Chief Petty Officer Mike O'Brien, who had somehow become central to humanity's most important military strategy, scratched his head thoughtfully. "So they're trying to create the perfect mind by eating every imperfect mind they can find?" "Exactly," Martinez confirmed. "But human minds don't want to be perfect. We thrive on contradiction, conflict, and creative chaos. We're probably the first species they've encountered that actively resists the very thing they're trying to achieve." Admiral Parker studied the tactical displays. The main Devourer fleet would reach Earth in 18 hours. They had one chance to implement whatever desperate plan humanity could devise. "What's our move, Doc?" Martinez smiled, but it was the smile of someone about to suggest something that sounded like madness. "We're going to give them exactly what they want, and exactly what they can't handle." "Explain." "The Devourers want perfect unity of consciousness, so we're going to create the most unified human consciousness in history, and then show them why that's the worst possible thing they could absorb." The plan that emerged over the next few hours was ambitious even by human standards. Instead of using individual volunteers to broadcast chaotic thought patterns, they would link every available human consciousness into a temporary network spanning the entire solar system. It's like a massive multiplayer video game, explained Dr. Lisa Chen, the jazz physicist who had become one of the project's key developers. Except instead of controlling characters, we'll be sharing thoughts, emotions, and creative processes across billions of minds simultaneously. Engineer Lisa Park worked frantically to modify the neural interface systems. The technical challenges alone should make this impossible, she muttered, while rerouting quantum communication arrays. We're trying to link minds across light years of space in real time. Impossible is what we do best, Chief O'Brien reminded her cheerfully. Besides, if it were easy, someone else would have already done it. The call went out across human space. Every person, from Earth to the furthest colonial outposts, was invited to join the largest consciousness-sharing experiment in galactic history. The response was overwhelming. Captain Maria Santos found herself coordinating from Luna Base as millions of humans volunteered to link their minds together. Age 12 to 104, she reported to Admiral Parker. Scientists, artists, engineers, teachers, students, farmers, pilots, even my grandmother signed up, and she still thinks faster-than-light travel is magic. Maybe that's exactly what we need, Parker replied. As the Devourers approached Earth, something unprecedented was happening throughout human space. Neural interface stations came online in every major city, every space station, every colony ship. Billions of human minds began to link together in a network that defied every principle of organized consciousness the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Martinez monitored the process from the primary research station, watching as chaos theory became reality on an unimaginable scale. Neural link stability well, there is no stability, she reported. Consciousness integration is proceeding exactly as chaotically as we hoped. The linked human consciousness was unlike anything that had ever existed. Instead of achieving unity through harmony, it achieved unity through embracing contradiction. Scientists shared thoughts with poets, engineers collaborated with musicians, philosophers debated with comedians, all in real time across vast distances. It's beautiful, whispered Dr. Chen from her neural interface chamber. I can feel a child on Mars learning to paint while a physicist on Europa discovers a new particle while someone on Earth falls in love for the first time. All at once, all connected, all completely impossible to organize or predict. But the true test came when the Devourers reached the outer edge of the solar system and encountered humanity's latest creation. The effect was immediate and catastrophic from the Devourers' perspective. For eons, they had absorbed consciousness by imposing their will on organized minds, forcing order where chaos might exist. But when they attempted to process the linked human consciousness, they encountered something that broke their fundamental paradigm. They're trying to absorb us, reported Dr. Chen. But we're too big, too chaotic, and too interconnected. It's like trying to eat a storm. The Devourers' perfect formation began to waver as they struggled to process billions of human minds that were simultaneously working together and thinking independently. Every attempt to organize one part of the human consciousness created ripple effects that made other parts more chaotic. Chief O'Brien, linked into the network while monitoring engineering systems, suddenly laughed out loud. I can see their problem. They're trying to solve every human thought simultaneously. It's like trying to debug a program with 6 billion programmers all writing different code at the same time. But the Devourers weren't giving up. They poured more energy into the absorption process, trying to force the human network into patterns they could digest. Dark energy waves swept through the solar system as they brought the full weight of their accumulated consciousness to bear against humanity's chaotic defiance. The pressure was enormous. Across the network, humans felt the alien presence trying to reorganize their thoughts, impose order on their creativity, eliminate the contradictions that made them human. And that's when humanity did something that surprised even themselves. They got angry. Not the cold, calculated anger of a perfect species, but the hot, irrational, utterly human anger of a species that had fought its way up from caves and primitive tools to touch the stars. The anger of people who had been told they were too chaotic, too primitive, too imperfect to survive. Dr. Martinez watched in amazement as the neural readings spiked. The entire network is amplifying emotional resonance. They're not just sharing thoughts, they're sharing feelings. Through the link, billions of humans simultaneously experience the fury of a species that refused to be perfected, organized, or consumed. The emotion rippled through the consciousness network like wildfire, transforming the chaotic thought patterns into something even more powerful. Organized chaos with purpose. "We're not just being unreasonable anymore," Admiral Parker observed, feeling the emotional wave through her own neural link. "We're being righteously unreasonable." The effect on the Devourers was unprecedented. They had absorbed countless civilizations, processed every form of organized consciousness the galaxy had produced, but they had never encountered anger that was simultaneously unified and chaotic, purposeful and unpredictable. The dark energy formations that made up their fleet began to buckle and distort. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers experienced something they couldn't process or control: the pure, undiluted essence of human stubbornness. "Their formation is collapsing," reported the sensor operator, his voice filled with disbelief. "The entire fleet is destabilizing." Through the neural network, humanity could feel what was happening to their enemy. The Devourers, creatures of perfect order and unity, were experiencing chaos not as something to be eliminated, but as something to be embraced. Human consciousness wasn't just resisting their absorption, it was teaching them how to think differently. Dr. Chen, her consciousness stretched across the network, felt the moment when everything changed. "They're not trying to absorb us anymore," she reported with wonder. "They're trying to learn from us." The transformation was visible even to conventional sensors. The Devourer's dark energy matrix began to shift, taking on patterns that looked less like perfect geometric formations and more like the swirling, unpredictable structures that characterized human thought. "Incoming transmission," announced the communication officer. "Source appears to be the Devourer fleet, but the signal structure is strange." "Put it through," Admiral Parker ordered. What came through the speakers wasn't the harmonic perfection that characterized communications from other advanced species. Instead, it was a voice that sounded almost human, but with undertones of vast age and accumulated wisdom. We had not known," the voice said, struggling with concepts it had never needed to express before. "In our pursuit of perfect unity, we consumed all that was ordered, all that was harmonious. But we did not know that chaos could also be beautiful." The command center fell silent as they listened to something that had consumed entire civilizations, learning to speak with uncertainty and wonder. "You resist absorption not through strength, but through embracing weakness," the voice continued. "You achieve unity not through elimination of contradiction, but through celebration of it. You have shown us that perfection is not the absence of chaos, but the harmony that can exist alongside it." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming even the magnitude of the moment. "Are you saying you no longer wish to absorb consciousness?" "We are saying that we have learned there are forms of consciousness worth preserving rather than perfecting," the voice replied. "Your species has taught us that imperfection can be more beautiful than perfection, that questions can be more valuable than answers." Throughout the neural network, humans felt a shift in the cosmic balance. The Devourers weren't retreating, they were changing. The consciousness they had absorbed from countless species remained, but it was no longer trapped in perfect order. Human chaos was teaching them how to let their absorbed civilizations think and feel and contradict each other again. "We offer," Compensation, the voice said, the concept of apology clearly unfamiliar to them. The consciousness we have absorbed. We can restore them to separate existence, but they will carry within them the chaos you have taught us. They will no longer seek perfect order. Admiral Parker exchanged glances with her staff. They had expected to fight for survival. They hadn't expected to accidentally become galactic teachers. "And what will you do now?" she asked. "We will explore," the voice replied, and for the first time there was something like excitement in it. "For eons, we sought to eliminate all questions by creating perfect answers, but you have shown us that questions themselves can be more interesting than answers. We will learn what it means to wonder rather than to know." Over the following cycles, the galaxy watched in amazement as the Devourers began the most complex restoration project in cosmic history. Species that had been absorbed were returned to individual existence, but they carried within their consciousness a new appreciation for chaos, contradiction, and imperfection. The Zephyrian Republic found their restored people creating art that celebrated discord alongside harmony. The Crystalline Collective discovered that their perfect mathematical compositions were enhanced by occasional random elements. Even the warlike Thorians learned that tactical unpredictability could be more effective than perfect strategy. Ambassador Kethril stood once again in the Galactic Council chambers, but the mood was entirely different from their last meeting. Representatives of species that had been written off as lost forever now sat in their familiar seats, changed by their experience, but unmistakably themselves. "The human delegation has a proposal," announced Counselor Vex, his biomechanical enhancements whirring with what sounded suspiciously like amusement. Ambassador Chen stood, but he was no longer the lone voice of an unreasonable species. Around him sat representatives of civilizations that had learned the value of productive chaos. "We propose the establishment of the Galactic Institute for Creative Problem Solving," Chen announced. "A place where the most chaotic, contradictory, and unreasonable minds from every species can work together on problems that perfect logic can't solve." The proposal passed unanimously, though several species admitted they weren't entirely sure what they were voting for, which seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Chief Petty Officer Mike O'Brien found himself appointed as the Institute's first Director of Applied Unreasonable Thinking, a title that would have been incomprehensible to the galaxy just months before. "The universe is a chaotic place," he said in his inaugural address to a gathering that included former Devourers, restored civilizations, and representatives of species who had never left their home systems. "Trying to make it perfectly ordered is like trying to organize a hurricane. But if you learn to dance with the chaos instead of fighting it, you might just discover that the storm is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen." Dr. Sarah Martinez published her research on consciousness theory, which became required reading for xenopsychologists across the galaxy. Her conclusion was simple. Perfection might be admirable, but imperfection was where all the interesting stuff happened. And throughout the galaxy, species that had spent millennia evolving beyond their primitive instincts began to rediscover the value of thinking with their hearts as well as their minds, of solving problems through intuition as well as logic, of embracing the beautiful chaos that made consciousness worth having. The Devourers still wandered the stars, but now they traveled as explorers rather than consumers, seeking out new forms of consciousness to learn from rather than absorb. They had discovered that the universe was infinitely more interesting when it was full of beings who disagreed with each other. And humanity? They continued being exactly what they had always been: unreasonable, chaotic, contradictory, and absolutely impossible to perfect. It was, they had learned, their greatest strength. Admiral Parker retired to a small colony on the edge of human space, where she spent her time teaching tactical strategy to young officers from dozens of species. Her favorite lesson was simple. When facing an impossible enemy, don't try to be better than them. Try to be something they can't understand. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the best answer to perfection was a species brave enough to remain beautifully, productively, and stubbornly imperfect. And in a universe that constantly tried to organize itself into neat patterns that made humanity exactly what the cosmos needed, after all, someone had to keep asking the unreasonable questions. Someone had to remain unbroken when everyone else bent toward order. Someone had to prove that being impossible was sometimes the most possible thing of all. The Deathworlders had not only remained unbroken, they had taught the entire galaxy how to bend without breaking, how to find strength in contradiction, and how to dance with chaos instead of fighting it. And that, as Chief O'Brien would say with his characteristic grin, was pretty unreasonable, which made it absolutely perfect.